"She'll give you children," said girl's mother. Rancher was shocked to hear the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the vast rolling hills of the rancher's land. The day had been long, as it always was, filled with hard work and the sounds of hooves and rustling hay. The rancher wiped the sweat from his brow, his muscles aching from the day's labor. Desk. It was a man of few words, but his hands spoke for him. Calloused, strong, and steady from years of hard work. He had never been one for social visits, preferring the quiet solitude of his ranch to the hustle of the townsfolk. But today was different. He had been invited to the farm next door, a small but prosperous place run by a family he had known for many years. He had always admired the way they tended to their crops and animals with care, working together as a family. The invitation had come from the family's mother, a woman of strong character and sharp wit. She had sent word that she wanted to speak with him, and although he was hesitant, he had agreed. As he rode his horse up the dirt road toward their farm, he couldn't help but wonder what the visit was about. He had no pressing business with them, and he wasn't one to spend his evenings in the company of others. But he respected the family, especially the mother. G had always been direct, and there was something about her that commanded respect. He had a feeling she had something important to say, something that would change his course in a way he hadn't expected. When he arrived, the smell of freshly baked bread greeted him, and the warm light spilling from the windows of the farmhouse seemed to invite him in. He dismounted his horse and made his way to the front door, where the mother was already waiting. She greeted him with a firm handshake and a smile that, despite its warmth, didn't quite reach her eyes. "Press!" She led him inside to the dining room where a modest meal was set out on the table. The rancher took his seat, feeling a bit out of place in the cozy, well-kept home. He wasn't used to such domesticity, but he tried to push aside the discomfort. The conversation started like any other, small talk about the weather, the crops, and the animals. But there was an undercurrent to it all, a sense that something was coming. He could feel it in the way she watched him, as if weighing him carefully. Bravely, she had a way of making people feel like they were being observed from all angles, and it was both unsettling and fascinating at the same time. Finally, after a few minutes of talking, the mother leaned back in her chair and regarded him with a serious expression. The rancher felt a shift in the air, as if something important was about to be said. He sat up straighter, waiting for her to speak. He had known this woman for many years, and he had always respected her blunt honesty. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next. "She'll give you children," she said, her voice steady and sure. The rancher blinked, his mind momentarily unable to process the words. He had heard her correctly, hadn't he? His heart skipped a beat, and he glanced at her, unsure if he had misunderstood. The mother's gaze didn't waver, though. She stared at him, her expression unwavering. She seemed to have said exactly what she meant. "Excuse me?" the rancher asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though he wasn't sure why he felt such a need to clarify.
"She'll give you children,"
she repeated, her tone firm but not unkind.
"My daughter, she's of age now."
"It's time. She'll make a good wife, and you need her." "You're a man who could use a woman to care for the land, to give you the children you need. She's what you've been waiting for." The rancher felt a shock wave hit him, a mix of surprise and confusion flooding his thoughts. He had never expected anything like this. In all his years of living alone, working the land by himself, he had never once considered the idea of marriage being proposed so casually. It was as if the woman had already decided for him. Braced, trying to understand what she meant. Was this some sort of business arrangement? Did she think he was incapable of finding a wife on his own? Was this what he had been missing all these years? His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he was speechless. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to ask so many things, but all he could manage was a dumbfounded stare. The mother didn't seem to mind his silence. She simply continued, her voice calm as though she were discussing the weather. You've worked hard all your life, and now it's time to settle down. My daughter, she's a good woman. She'll give you children and help you run the ranch.
The two of you can build a life together. It's time to think of the future.
The rancher's mind was spinning. He hadn't come here for this. He had come for a meal, some simple conversation, but now he was caught in the web of a decision he hadn't even been allowed to make for himself. He glanced at the door, half expecting to see the girl herself standing there, waiting for him to take the next step. But she wasn't there. He wasn't sure how to feel about it all. It wasn't that he didn't want children. He had often thought about what it would be like to raise a family, but he had never felt the need to rush into it. He had always believed that if it was meant to happen, it would happen in its own time, not through a proposal from a stranger, no matter how well-meaning. The mother's gaze softened, but the determination in her eyes remained. You'll see.
It's for the best. She'll make a good wife.
And you'll be happy. You'll have children to carry on the ranch, to carry on your work. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The rancher felt as though the walls of the room were closing in on him. Breaths. He was caught in a situation he had never imagined, and now he had to figure out how to navigate it. His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them seemed to make sense. How could he make a decision like this? How could he accept this proposal when he hadn't even had a chance to speak to the girl herself? The mother didn't give him time to respond. She simply stood up, motioning for him to follow. You'll see, she said again. She'll be ready. And it will be good for both of you. The rancher rose slowly from his chair, his mind still reeling. Race. He wasn't sure what to think or feel. Was this some sort of test? A challenge he hadn't seen coming? Or was it truly an opportunity for a future that he had never considered? Breaths. All he knew was that he had to make a choice, and soon the decision would change the course of his life, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. As he walked out of the farmhouse, the cool evening air hit him like a wave. The stars twinkled above, as if the universe itself was watching him, waiting for him to make a decision. The rancher mounted his horse, his heart heavy with the weight of the words he had just heard. He rode back to his ranch in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion, uncertainty, and the strange new possibility that had been laid before him. The night air felt cool and quiet as the rancher reached his land. The moon hung above the fields like a silent watcher, lighting the path in a soft glow. He tied his horse near the fence and stood still for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of insects and the gentle wind moving through the tall grass. Normally, this peaceful scene would calm his mind. Tonight, it did the opposite. His thoughts were loud, echoing the words he had heard earlier, turning them over and over like stones in a river. He walked toward his small house, each step slow and heavy. Inside, everything looked the same as it always did. The wooden table stood near the window. A lamp rested on a shelf. Books were still by the door where he had left them that morning. Nothing in this place had changed, yet he felt like something inside him had shifted in a way he did not fully understand. He poured himself a cup of water and sat down at the table. His hands wrapped around the cup, but he did not drink. Red. His mind kept returning to the mother's voice, calm and sure, as if she had spoken a simple truth instead of a life-altering idea.
He wondered how someone could speak about another person's future so easily, like it was already written.
He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Memories from his past began to rise. He remembered being a young boy, running across open fields with his brothers, laughing as they chased each other until the sun went down. He remembered his parents working side by side, sharing quiet words and gentle smiles. That was what family had always looked like to him. It was never something planned or arranged.
It had grown naturally, like a tree taking root in good soil. Now, the idea of starting a family felt strange and distant.
He had spent so many years alone that he had built a life around silence and routine. He woke up before sunrise, worked until the sky turned orange, ate simple meals, and slept when his body told him to. His days were full, even if they were quiet. He had told himself that this was enough. But was it really? He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the land stretched wide and empty. The fence lines disappeared into the dark, and the barn stood tall like a shadow in the distance. He had built all of this with his own hands. Every post in the fence, every plank in the barn, every corner of the house carried his effort and care for it. It was a life he was proud of. Still, as he looked out at the open space, he felt how empty it truly was.
He thought about the girl.
He realized he barely knew anything about her. He did not know what she liked, what she feared, or what she dreamed about. All he knew was what her mother had said about her, as if she were a promise instead of a person. That thought made him uncomfortable. He did not want to see someone as a solution to his loneliness. He wanted to see them as a person, with their own life and choices. The next morning, the rancher woke early. As always, the sky was pale and the air smelled fresh. He fed the animals and checked the fences, trying to focus on the work in front of him. Normally, these simple tasks brought him a sense of calm. But today, his mind wandered. He kept thinking about whether he should go back to the farm next door, whether he should speak to the girl himself, whether he should pretend the whole conversation had never happened. As the sun climbed higher, he made a decision. He could not keep turning this over in his head without seeking some kind of clarity. He needed to see the girl, not as someone's daughter or as a future idea, but as a person standing in front of him. He cleaned up, changed his shirt, and saddled his horse. The ride to the neighboring farm felt longer than usual. His heart beat faster with every step the horse took. He was not sure what he would say or how he would start the conversation. He only knew that he could not stay silent. When he arrived, the farm looked peaceful, just as it always did. Chickens moved around the yard, and the fields swayed gently in the breeze. The mother was outside, hanging clothes on a line. She noticed him and gave a small nod, as if she had expected him to return. "She's in the garden," the mother said, pointing toward the back of the house. The rancher thanked her and walked around the side of the building. There, he saw the girl for the first time since the night before. She was kneeling by a row of plants, her hands in the soil. The sun lit her hair, and she looked calm and focused, as if the world around her did not exist. He stopped a few steps away, unsure how to announce himself. He did not want to startle her. He cleared his throat gently. She looked up, surprised, but not frightened. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different from the one he had known at his ranch. This silence was not empty. It was full of questions and unspoken thoughts.
"Hello," he said at last.
"Hello," she replied, standing up and brushing dirt from her hands. He noticed how she held herself, straight but cautious, like someone who had learned to be careful.
He wondered how much she knew about what her mother had said to him. He wondered if she felt the same pressure he did. "I came to talk," he said, choosing his words slowly, "about what your mother said last night." Her face changed slightly, and he saw something like worry pass through her eyes. She nodded. I thought you might. They walked a short distance and sat on a low wooden bench near the garden. The air was warm, and the sound of bees filled the space between them.
I don't want to make this awkward, he began.
But I also don't want to pretend it didn't happen.
I don't really know you, and I don't think it's right to talk about the future without understanding each other first.
She looked down at her hands, which were resting in her lap. My mother believes in planning everything, she said softly. Shh. She thinks it keeps people safe. And what do you think? He asked. She hesitated before answering. Breaths. I think people should be allowed to choose their own paths. But sometimes it's hard to say that out loud. Her honesty surprised him. He felt a small sense of relief, knowing that she was not simply accepting her mother's words without thought. I'm not here because I feel forced, he said.
I'm here because I want to understand. I don't want to make decisions about someone's life without hearing their voice.
She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to see who he was beyond the quiet man who lived on the ranch next door. I appreciate that, she said.
I don't want to be seen as an answer to someone else's problems. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt lighter. The rancher felt a strange sense of comfort, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his chest.
He realized that this conversation, simple as it was, mattered more than any statement made at a dinner table. They talked for a long time after that. They spoke about small things at first, like the weather and the work they did each day. Then, slowly, they shared more. He told her about how he had come to own his land, about the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. She told him about growing up on the farm, about her dreams of seeing places beyond the fields she had known all her life. As the sun moved across the sky, the rancher felt something shift again, but this time it felt gentle instead of overwhelming. He did not see her as a promise or a future plan. He saw her as a person with a voice, a story, and a choice of her own.
When it was time for him to leave, he stood up and thanked her for talking with him.
She smiled, and the smile felt real, not polite or forced. As he rode back to his ranch, the land around him looked different. It was still wide and quiet, still shaped by his hard work. But now, it no longer felt quite as empty. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if their paths would truly join. But, for the first time since the night before, he felt calm instead of confused. He knew that whatever happened next, it would not be decided by a single sentence spoken at a table. It would be shaped by conversations, understanding, and the slow, careful building of trust. And that, he realized, was a future he could face without fear. The days that followed felt different for the rancher. The morning still came early. The chores still needed to be done, and the work on the land never ceased. But something in his heart had shifted. His thoughts no longer ran in circles, repeating the same worries and uncertainties. Now his mind was filled with questions about what he had learned from his conversation with the girl, and the quiet connection that had begun to form between them. He found himself thinking about her more often than he expected. She had spoken with such honesty, such clarity, that it left him wondering if he had been too focused on his own life, his own quiet existence. For years he had kept his distance from the world, hiding behind his work and the solitude of his ranch. But now, there was the thought of someone else, a person who could share in all the moments that had once felt so solitary. He had never considered the idea of love or partnership with any seriousness. His life had been simple. He worked hard, kept to himself, and did what was needed to keep the ranch running. There was no room for distractions, or so he had believed. But now, after that conversation, He realized that he had been living in a kind of self-made prison. He had shut out the possibility of sharing his life with anyone, convinced that solitude was the only way to live. But, after meeting her, things were different. It wasn't that he was ready to rush into anything, far from it. It was just that he saw something in her that made him rethink his choices, something that made him realize that perhaps, just perhaps, he had been wrong in thinking he could do everything on his own. She had dreams, too, and they weren't the same dreams he had built for himself. She spoke of a world beyond the fields and the barn, a world that was different from the one he had known. And yet, in some way, he found that he wanted to know more about it. It wasn't about fixing anything or making up for lost time. It wasn't about fulfilling a duty or answering a question. It was about something more quiet, more subtle. It was about possibility, the possibility of a life shared, of two people walking through the days together, helping each other along the way. The rancher had no illusions. He knew that building a life with someone wasn't something that happened overnight. It would take time, effort, and, most of all, patience. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of that idea. The possibility felt more like a slow, steady heartbeat than a quick rush, and that made it feel more real. On the third morning after their talk, he rode over to her farm again. This time he wasn't sure what he would say. He had thought of many things to talk about. The weather, the work on the land, the cows that needed tending. But none of that felt right. He wanted to talk to her, not just about the usual things, but about the things they had shared in their last conversation. There was something in her eyes that made him want to understand her better, to see the world from her point of view. He arrived at the farm in the late morning. The air was warm and the sky was clear, but there was a quiet feeling about the place, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The girl was outside, sitting by the garden again. Her hands were busy with something, pulling weeds from the soil, but she looked up when she heard him approach. Ray gasped. "Hello," he said, his voice more steady this time, but still unsure. "I thought I'd come by and check on things." She smiled, and for a moment the rancher thought he saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. It wasn't quite joy, but something close, maybe curiosity, or perhaps something more. "I'm glad you came," she said, standing up. Breast. She brushed off her hands and looked around as if unsure of what to say next. The rancher felt the same way. They had spoken before, but this was different. This was not a conversation about the future or about duty. This was a conversation about understanding each other, about getting to know one another in a way that was simple yet meaningful. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, his voice calm but filled with sincerity.
"And about the way things have been between us. I don't want you to think I'm rushing into anything."
"I don't want to make any promises that I can't keep." The girl looked at him, her face serious but kind.
"Spray." "I didn't think you were rushing," she said softly. "I just wanted to know that you weren't doing this because of what my mother said."
1 hour happens. It's because we both decided it together. Her words settled over him like a blanket. He could feel the weight of them, and for the first time, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't about the promise of children or the work they could do together. It was about the possibility of choosing each other, without the pressure of outside expectations, without the need for anything other than their own decision.
"That's what I want too," he replied, his voice steady.
Inspiration. I don't want this to be about anyone else's idea of what should happen. I want it to be something that feels right for both of us. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other, not in silence, but in a shared understanding. It was the kind of understanding that didn't need words, but still the words came anyway. It was as if they both knew that this was the beginning of something, even if they didn't yet know where it would lead. "I'm not sure what the future holds," he continued, his voice low but full of hope. But I do know this. I want to find out. I want to find out with you. She smiled then, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. That's all I ask, she said. Let's take it slow and see where it goes. Rest. No promises. Just the chance to see what happens. For a moment, the rancher felt like the world had opened up before him. It wasn't that everything was suddenly clear, but it was as if a door had been opened, and through it, he could see a new path, Brace. A path where he didn't have to go it alone, where the future was uncertain, but the possibilities were endless. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about their lives, their work, their families, and their dreams. It wasn't a conversation filled with grand promises or declarations, but it was a conversation that mattered. It was the beginning of something more than either of them had expected, and yet it felt right. It felt like the first step down a road they could walk together. As the day came to an end, the rancher knew he had made the right choice in coming here. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, he felt excited about the unknown. They said their goodbyes, and he mounted his horse, ready to ride back to his ranch. The evening air was cool, and the sky was turning shades of pink and orange as the sun began to set. The rancher rode slowly, savoring the quiet of the land around him. He didn't need to rush back. For the first time, he was content just to be on his way. But whatever the future held, he knew that he wasn't alone on this journey. And that, he realized, made all the difference. The days after their talk were quieter than usual, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something important was shifting in his life. He had always believed that the steady rhythm of his work was all he needed. The cows, the horses, the fields. They were his world, and he had built everything around them. But now, as the days passed, he found himself looking at everything with new eyes. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate his land anymore. He still did, deeply. But now the land wasn't the only thing that mattered, Britt. Every morning when he went out to check on the animals or fix a broken fence, his thoughts often wandered to the girl. He remembered her calm voice, the way she had listened to him without interruption, and how, despite the quiet simplicity of their conversation, he had felt heard in a way he hadn't in years. He had come to realize that it wasn't just her words that had stayed with him. It was the way she had made him feel. She made him feel like there was more to life than just surviving, more to the world than just his work. The rancher knew he needed to be careful. He didn't want to rush into anything. They had only just begun to understand each other, and they both needed time to figure out where they stood. But every time he thought about her, his heart felt lighter, as if the weight he had carried for so long was being lifted little by little. He wasn't used to these feelings, but they weren't unwelcome. As the days grew warmer, the rancher found himself visiting her farm more often. At first, their conversations had been short and to the point, just an exchange of pleasantries or talk about the weather. But as they spent more time together, the conversations became deeper. They spoke about their families, about what it had been like to grow up in such different worlds. She had always lived on a small farm, working alongside her parents, learning the skills of the land from a young age. Pears. Her life had been shaped by the quiet rhythms of farm life, just like his own had been. But her world had also been full of expectations, ones that she had never quite been able to meet. The rancher was surprised to learn that, just like him, she had dreams that didn't fit into the life that had been planned for her, and she had always wanted to see the world, to experience things beyond the small town she had grown up in. But she had never been given the chance. Her parents had made it clear that her duty was to stay on the farm, to help with the land, to marry and have children. But she had always wondered if there was more out there for her. The rancher understood that feeling. He had never really considered the idea of leaving his land behind. But now, he found himself thinking about what it would be like to explore the world beyond the fields and the barn. He had never traveled far from his home, and the thought of seeing new places, experiencing new things, felt both exciting and terrifying. As they talked more, the rancher began to see how similar they were. Right. They both had spent their lives doing what was expected of them. Both had followed the path set out for them by their families, and both had longed for something more, something different. They shared a quiet understanding, and with each conversation, that understanding deepened. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, the rancher found himself at her farm again. They had been talking for hours, the conversation flowing easily, like they had known each other much longer than they actually had. There was a comfort between them now, a shared sense of trust that made everything feel natural. She was sitting on the porch, her legs crossed, looking out at the horizon. He sat beside her, his hands resting on his knees, unsure of what to say next. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, but was a silence that spoke of shared moments and unspoken thoughts. Brass. I've been thinking, she said, breaking the silence, about what you said, about finding something more. I think you're right. Maybe it's not just about working the land. Maybe it's about living, really living. He looked at her, surprised by how much her words resonated with him. Grasp. He had spent so long focused on the work, on the routine, that he hadn't really thought about what it meant to live fully. He had always believed that hard work was enough, that it was all he needed. But now, sitting next to her, he realized that there was more to life than just surviving. There was a life to be lived, and maybe, just maybe, they could find it together. I never thought much about it, he said, his voice soft. I've always just worked, focused on the ranch. But when I talk to you, when I hear about your dreams, I can't help but think maybe there's more for both of us. She smiled, a small knowing smile. Breaths. Maybe we both just need to take a chance, she said. Maybe we both need to let go of what's expected and find our own way. He nodded slowly, taking in her words. It felt like a turning point, a moment when everything shifted. For the first time, he could see beyond the ranch, beyond the hard work, and into a future filled with possibilities. The thought of stepping into the unknown, of choosing a life that was different from what he had always known, no longer scared him. In fact, it felt right. I think you're right, he said, his voice stronger now. Maybe it's time we both take that chance. They sat together in silence for a while longer, watching the sunset and listening to the sounds of the evening. The air was warm, and the world around them felt peaceful, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for them to make their next move. The rancher didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time he felt ready to find out. As he left that evening, the rancher felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced before. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer felt like something to be feared. It felt like an adventure, a journey that he would take with someone who shared his hopes, his fears, and his dreams. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet moments and meaningful conversations. Rancher and the girl spent more time together, working side by side, talking about everything and nothing at all. They began to understand each other in ways they hadn't expected, and the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't a fast whirlwind kind of love. It was steady, like the slow growth of a tree, rooted in trust and mutual respect. The rancher began to realize that he had never truly understood what it meant to have a partner, to share a life with someone who wasn't just there for the work, but also for the companionship. And with her, he saw the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by duty or obligation, but by choice and shared dreams.
One evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, they stood together on the porch, watching the night unfold.
The rancher took a deep breath and turned to her, his heart full of words he hadn't yet said. But as he looked at her, he realized that he didn't need to speak them or see it. She already knew. "I think I'm ready," he said softly. "I think we both are." She smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet certainty.
"Ready for what?" she asked, her voice full of hope.
"To take that chance," he said, taking her hand in his. "To build something new together." And in that moment, under the vast, endless sky, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had found something rare, something worth holding on to, a chance at a life that was truly their own, free from the expectations of others, and full of the promise of all that was still to come. The morning light came softly through the window, touching the wooden floor of the rancher's house with a warm glow. The rancher woke up before the sun had fully risen, as he always did, but this time, the quiet of the room felt different. It no longer felt empty. It felt full of something new, something hopeful. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of birds outside, and let a small smile form on his face. He thought about the girl and the promise they had made, not in words, but in the shared understanding that they would move forward together. There had been no grand speech, no big moment, just a simple decision, made with care and honesty. That was what made it feel real. He got dressed and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with soft shades of blue and gold. The land stretched out before him, wide and open, just as it always had. But now, it felt like a place that could hold more than just his work. It felt like a place where a life could grow. Later that morning, he rode over to her farm. The ride felt peaceful, almost gentle, like the world itself was encouraging him to keep moving forward. When he arrived, he found her near the barn, carrying a small basket filled with tools. She looked up when she saw him, and her face lit up with a smile that felt warm and genuine. "Psst. You're early," she said. "So are you," he replied, returning the smile. They walked together across the yard, talking about small things at first. The weather, the animals, the work that needed to be done. But even these simple topics felt meaningful now, because they were sharing them. It wasn't just two people passing time. It was two people building something, one moment at a time. As the day went on, they worked side by side. They fixed a loose fence post, cleaned out the barn, and helped each other carry heavy buckets of water. The work was tiring, but it felt lighter when they did it together. There was laughter, too, when one of the animals tried to wander off, or when they both struggled to lift something at the same time. These small moments, simple and ordinary, began to feel like the foundation of something strong. During a break, they sat under the shade of a large tree. The leaves moved gently in the breeze, and the sunlight danced on the ground around them. "I never thought my life would look like this," she said quietly. "I always imagined I would stay here forever, doing the same things every day." "And now?" he asked.
"Now I see that even if I stay, things can still change."
"It's not about where you are. It's about who you're with." Her words stayed with him. He realized how true they were. He had always believed that change meant leaving, traveling, or doing something completely different. But now he saw that change could happen right where you stood, as long as you opened your heart to it. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger.
They began to spend more time at the ranch together, planning small improvements and dreaming about what they could build.
They talked about adding a new section to the barn, planting a small garden near the house, and creating a space where they could sit and watch the sunset at the end of each day. The rancher found himself looking forward to the mornings in a way he never had before. It wasn't just about getting the work done. It was about seeing her smile, hearing her voice and sharing the quiet moments that filled the spaces between their conversations. One evening, as the sky turned deep shades of orange and purple, they stood together near the fence line. The land around them was still and calm, like it was listening. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking the silence, "about what comes next for us." She turned to him, her expression open and curious. "What do you think comes next?"
I think we keep going, he said. Slowly.
Powerfully, but together. She nodded, a soft smile on her face. "That sounds right to me." They didn't need to say more. The future didn't need to be planned down to every detail. What mattered was that they were willing to face it side by side. Not everyone understood their choice. The mother at first was unsure. She had her own ideas about how things should be, and it took time for her to see that her daughter was happier now than she had ever been. When she saw the way they worked together, supported each other, and spoke with honesty, her concerns slowly faded. One afternoon she watched them from the porch as they walked across the yard, talking and laughing. She sighed, a small, thoughtful sound, and then smiled to herself. But she realized that what mattered most was not what she had planned, but what her daughter had chosen. The rancher felt a sense of peace he had never known before. His life was still full of hard work, early mornings, and long days. But now it was also full of shared meals, quiet talks under the stars, and the comfort of knowing that he was not alone. There were challenges, of course. There were days when the work was too much, when the weather was harsh, and when doubts crept in. But they faced those moments together. They talked through their worries instead of keeping them inside. They listened to each other, even when it was difficult. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, she spoke about her dreams again. "I still want to see what's beyond all this," she said, gesturing toward the wide land in front of them. "I don't know when or how, but I want to know what the world is like out there." He thought for a moment before answering. "Then one day we'll go," he said. "We'll plan a trip. We'll see new places. And when we come back, this will still be here, waiting for us."
Her eyes brightened. "You'd really do that?" "Yes," he said without hesitation.
"Because your dreams matter to me." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in silence, watching the stars move slowly across the sky. The world felt wide and full of promise. As time went on, their life together became something steady and strong. They didn't rush, burn. They didn't force anything. They let their bond grow naturally, like the fields they tended, like the trees that slowly reached toward the sky. The rancher often thought back to the night when everything had started, when a single sentence had shaken his world. He realized now that while those words had been surprising, what truly mattered was what came after. The conversations, the understanding, the choice they had made to see each other as people, not as plans or expectations. One morning, as they walked across the land together, the sun rising behind them, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Perfect. His life was not perfect, and it never would be, but it was real. It was full, and it was shared. Rasp. He stopped for a moment and looked at her. "I'm glad I didn't turn away that night," he said. She smiled. "So am I." They continued walking, side by side, their steps in quiet rhythm with each other. Berate. The future was still unknown, still open, still full of questions. But they were no longer afraid of it. They had learned that life wasn't about following a path someone else had chosen for you. It was about finding your own way, with someone who was willing to walk with you no matter where the road led. And as they moved forward together, under the wide open sky, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it not as two separate lives, but as one shared journey, built on trust, respect, and the simple, powerful choice to be there for each other, every step of the way.